Okay, good morning, everyone. So, in this session entitled Creating Characters to Start Writing Fiction, we're going to work on a few exercises that are going to provide a platform for students for you to express yourselves authentically and allowing you to explore your thoughts, your emotions, and experiences through writing. We're going to work on a couple of exercises. We're going to be introducing a couple of generalities related to creative writing, and we're going to explore how to write, how to do creative writing in English as a foreign language. So first of all, let's try to ask ourselves, what is fiction? And what do we mean when we say fiction? What do you think is fiction? Most people think that fiction is basically creating new worlds or creating alternative realities. We usually think about fiction more like using science fiction or talking about science fiction in order to discuss what's going on in other worlds, in other dimensions, and even the future. Let's listen to this video by V.S. Pritchett with a couple of quotes by V.S. Pritchett, and we try to get an idea about what fiction is.
The sea fog began to lift towards noon. It had been blowing in, thin and loose, for 2 days, smudging the tops of the trees up the ravine where the house stood.
In this passage from V.S. Pritchett, the phrase thin and loose may not be a way of seeing fog that has occurred to you before. The fog is not just presented as uniformly thick, but has a particularised variety, a quality of changeability and movement. Thin and loose are ordinary words that we all use frequently, but in this context they create a vivid and perhaps unexpected image. Smudging is also a familiar word. We have probably all worried about smudging ink when we are writing, or leaving smudges on a polished surface. But we may not have thought about trees being smudged by fog. Though once the idea has been introduced, we can imagine vividly what it looks like. Again, an ordinary word has been used in an unexpected way to create a fresh and imaginative picture.
Okay, so that was basically a presentation about what fiction is, taken from the words by V.S. Pritchett. And let's go back to the concept of what fiction is. Now let's go back to the question of what is fiction. So we can say, or we can summarize from this video, that fiction is not about using the most florid language. Most people think that literature is about using the most florid, intricate, complex terms that come to our heads. But actually, fiction is about not using the most florid language, it's actually using the language that we had at hand, that we have at hand in the most unexpected situations or ways. On my part, I think, and I share this definition of what fiction is. I think that fiction is about making characters. It's about creating people. It's about picturing your characters, making the best of everything you already have and you already know. Your experiences, including your reading experiences, including your background, including your emotions, including what you know about the world, your memories, your personal history, your feelings and desires, as well as your language, imagination, observation, and ideas, in order to picture a series of characters um, interacting in our own reality, can be, or in worlds that we create ourselves. So the very first thing that we're going to do today is to create some of those characters, and for that we're going to do an exercise. We're going to work on this exercise. So the exercise is called U-Poem. This is going to be our warm-up for today's lesson. This exercise was not invented by me. I'm adapting it from a top class activities, 50 fun games and activities by Jeremy Harmer. So I want you to think about somebody you either love or hate, It can be a member of your family, it can be your girlfriend, it can be your boyfriend, your sweetheart, work colleague, a lover, a fellow student, etc. And I want you to write about that person that you have thought as if they were the following items. So you're going to write that person as a kind of food, a kind of weather, a type of furniture, a means of transport, an article of clothing, a part of the house, a color, or a month of the year. Let me give you an example. So if we're going to write about a person we love as a kind of food, in my case, I would say you are like a sweet cherry pie melting in my mouth. I think it's extremely tasty, so I would use that simile in order to compare a person I love with some kind of food. If it is about kind of weather, I would say something like, you are a sunny, shiny day of a never ending summer. You are a sunny, shiny day of a never ending summer. The reason is simple. I like shiny, sunny days. I think that that kind of weather is the one that gets me on the move, on the mood, on the mood for having some good time, for having fun. So I think that's a perfect kind of weather. You as a type of furniture, I would say you are the bed where I sleep in on stormy nights. Why? Because I feel cozy, because I feel protected when I'm in bed, especially on stormy nights. As a means of transport, I was thinking about this question. I was thinking about this line carefully, and I came up with the conclusion that the best comparison would be you as a trans-millennial bus. So you are a trans-millennial bus, taking my breath away. It's just a way of make some kind of a pun here to play a joke. I think the trans-millennial is awful, but I wanted to play with the emotions of people, and I think that well, so many people have so many negative emotions about trans-millennial. I said to myself, I wonder like what's good about trans-millennial. And I said, well, it takes your breath away in a literal way, and it could do it in a figurative way as well. In terms of an article of clothing, I think that you're the raincoat that protects me from the heavy rain, for example, would be a perfect comparison here. You as a part of a house, you could say something like, you are a cozy, warm evening in front of a fireplace. Not many people have fireplaces, but I remember when I was a university student, I had a fireplace, and this was we had a living room, and there was a fireplace, and this was our favorite place in order to sit down to maybe playing a round of board games and just have fun. You as a color, I could say something like you are red, full of energy, passion, and what else could happen? I don't know. Action. And finally, you as a month of the year. Well, why not? December. Why December? Because December is a time to celebrate. December is a time where people feel most happy. So I felt like, well, it's the happiest time of the year. It's the time where people feel usually the best. Usually that's the time when people feel uh, in the mood to enjoy themselves. So I think that is a perfect comparison. Okay, so we already have our you poem. Let's read it one more time to see if we can actually picture that image of that person that, well, in this case, I have in mind. You're like a sweet cherry pie melting in my mouth. You are a sunny, shiny day of a never ending summer. You are the bed where I sleep in on stormy nights. You are the trans-millennial bus taking my breath away. You are the raincoat that protects me from the heavy rain. You are a cozy, warm evening in front of the fireplace. You are red, full of energy, passion, and Action. You like December, a time to celebrate and be happy. Okay, what do you think? Do you like my poem? I know I'm not Quevedo, I'm not Becker, I'm not even Shakespeare, of course not. But well, that was my first attempt. I think for a first attempt, it was actually quite good. Teacher, I'm done. What do I do now? So what do you do now? What you're supposed to do now? Simple. Swap papers, swap the worksheet with the person next to you, read the poems, compare, talk about your experience. Was it easy? Was it difficult? Do you think that by reading your partner's poem, you're able to flesh out that person that your partner had in mind? Can't you picture your partner's character in your mind? Can't you think about what kind of person that person is? Can you even like picture that person in terms of physicality, in terms of physical characteristics? That would be a great thing. So try to do it. Oh, someone would say something like, "What about writing a similar poem for a person you really love?" Well, because as the Grumpy Cat says, "I'm free of all prejudices. I hate everyone equally." That's absolutely possible. You can actually make another version of this poem, and we can make our you poem for a person you hate. Let's take a look at an example. So this is my example. I've already got it here. The same items, the same instruction. You have to think about one person, but this time it's not a person you love. It's a person you really hate. A person you found the most despicable person in the history of mankind. So you have to compare this person with some kind of food, a kind of weather, a type of furniture, a means of transport, an article of clothing, a part of a house, a color, or a month of the year. Let's read my example and let's see if you can actually picture that kind of person. You're like a stinky stew made of rotten mutton. You are a weird, wild hailstorm in the middle of nowhere. You're like a futon, a clever combination of couch and bed, which is both a terrible bed and a terrible couch. You're like an empty transmillennial bus with a dog sitting by my side. You are a pair of stinky sweaty football socks falling apart. You're like the puke toilet of a shanty town bar. You are grey, so depressing and bland, lifeless and plain. And you like February, smaller than the others, these days hotter and usually hard up. What do you think? Too many negative things? Can you think of better comparisons in order to um, picture a person that you really despise, that you really hate, that you think despicable? Give it a try. That'll be fantastic. It's also important when you're doing creative writing to read characters. So when you're reading other novels and stories, it's important to pay attention to the way characters appear, especially the very first time that they're described. It's very important to see how characters appear and what are the most important essential things that we need to take into account in order to start taking the task of writing ourselves. So I propose to take a look at the following characters descriptions, and I want you to note down how you think the writers are managing to portray them. Because, as George R.R. Martin said, my characters always meet their deadlines. All right, so we got a couple of those descriptions, and let's focus on the way these characters are described and they are presented as well. This section, for example, is taken from The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring by J.R.R. Tolkien. You can find it on page 274 on the book, and it's the first appearance of Elrond. Elrond, the leader of the elves. The face of Elrond was ageless, neither old nor young. though in it was written the memory of many things, both glad and sorrowful. His hair as dark as the shadows of twilight, and upon it was a set of circlets of silver. His eyes were grey as a clear evening, and in them was a light like the light of stars. Okay, what do you think about this description? I really find kind of compelled to the way the comparisons are created, no? Especially there is a comparison between concepts of darkness, shadows, lights, colors, especially gray, silver, etc. So this makes Elrond, in a sense, some kind of a contradiction, but a very clever dichotomy as well. His face is ageless, but he's got written the memory of so many things because he's been in that earth, in that kind of planet, almost forever. Let's take a look at another example taken from Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick, page 39 of the novel. Black-haired and slender, wearing the huge new dust filtering glasses, she approached his car, her hands deep in the pockets of her brightly striped long coat. She had on her sharply defined small face an expression of sullen distaste. So this is the first appearance of this character, Rachel, the most important female character in the novel, and as we can see, we don't know yet if Rachel is a replicant, if Rachel is a human, but at least that we know that she's got some kind of a distaste in her face. She doesn't feel quite attractive to our protagonist, but at the same time, she's showing all her kind of like smoothness and eroticism at the times of getting close to him. Sorry. Let's take a look at another example here. I like this one by J.K. Rowling. The very first pages of the Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone novel. If the motorcycle was huge, it was nothing to the man sitting astride it. It was twice as tall as a normal man and at least 5 times as wide. It looked simply too big to be allowed, and so wild. Long tangles of bushy black hair and beard hid most of his face. He had hands the size of trash can lids, and his feet in their leather boots were like baby dolphins. So you can see there is a lot of exaggerations over here. No, this guy's 5 times as wide as a normal man. He's twice as tall as a regular man. He's just too big to be allowed anywhere, which is kind of interesting because this is the guy that is selected by Dumbledore in order to guide Harry Potter, not only inside the magical world, but actually he goes to the regular Muggles world and serves as this kind of bridge between the regular world and the magical world. Now let's take a look at this final example, taken from A Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin on page 40. 15 years past when they have ridden forth to win a throne. The Lord of the Storm's End has been clean-shaven, clear-eyed, and muscled like a maiden's fantasy. 6.5 feet tall, he towered over lesser men, and when he donned the armor and the great antler helmet of his house, he became a veritable giant. He had a giant's strength too. His weapon of choice was a spiked iron hammer that Ned could scarcely lift. In those days, the smell of leather and blood had clung to him like perfume. It's a very interesting description of this character because it's actually comparing this description with the new description of the king. No, it's actually a description of Robert Baratheon, and it's showing that he was another kind of person. He was almost a veritable giant. He was a guy with lots of power, and he was a guy that every woman desired, every woman wanted to have, in a sense. So how do you introduce characters? And these are some things that we need to take into account for our next exercises. First of all, we have to think about a person that you feel you know quite well. though preferably not a partner, as this can throw up all sorts of problems. And then you start listing the good points about that person. What it is that you like about those people, what are the bad points as well. I think it's important to always note that there are some good and bad qualities of everyone, and that should include fiction characters. I think it's absolutely necessary in order to picture your character as a regular person, as if he were real. If you want to make a believable character, it's very important that you give him or give her some details, some characteristics that might make him a person who might commit mistakes. It's important to identify what are the irritating habits of this kind of person, if there are some opinions and attitudes that you don't care for, and think back to when you first met him or met her, if you're talking about a person you already met, no? Over time, how did you discover the things that you know about this person? Try to answer the following questions whenever you are introducing characters based on real people, or even if you are just inventing those characters, if this is the first time that you're going to put them on paper. Think about these questions and answer questions such as, what was the first thing that struck you about them? What do you see as their outstanding physical characteristics? It's very important that you list no more than 3. Why no more than 3? Because I think that 3 is going to leave your description limited, and that's going to leave you more room to play with your character. It's also very important to provide your reader with some room to imagine the kind of character that you're picturing in uh, in his or her mind. How are they dressed and what did they tell you? Do you have any little gestures or ways of speaking that caught your attention? Did they maintain eye contact or avoid it? Did they seek out physical contact or shrink from it? What did they talk about? Now that you've got to know them, what do you think makes them tick? What are the motivators? What are the main motivators of these characters? How do you get this knowledge, no? And how does this knowledge, now that you know him or know her a little bit better, differ from your first impressions of that person? Finally, it's very important to think about what sort of person you think they really are. Are they straightforward people? Are they dishonest people? Are they morally? Do they have some kind of a moral? Are they morally correct people? Are they on a verge of morally immoral person? Are they tolerant people? Are they intolerant? Do they have any kind of intolerances that are kind of manifested through their speech? It's very important to keep in mind those things. Are they pleasant? Are they easily aroused? Are they warm-hearted or aloof? It's very important to keep in mind those different questions when you're creating your characters and when you're introducing them to your potential readers. Now, for the most difficult part of the task, just how exactly did you get the answers to the last 2 questions? Remember that the 2 questions were. Well, I couldn't see the 2 questions. I don't know why. But the 2 questions were about the motivations, not the motivations of this character. And if I'm not mistaken, if the character is an honest, dishonest person, morally correct person, war-hearted person. So it's very important when you're describing, for example, people based on real people, to answer the question, how did you get the answers to those last 2 questions? A possibility, a third person might well have given you some information about them, but that information may not have been accurate, so that information might be false. It is very important to reflect on this shortcoming because the main objective of a writer is to know their characters deeply, to know what they want, to know their background, and the way that they would behave in a normal, everyday situation. Then, when you get to know this information, when you have tackled all these questions, I want you to write a short paragraph where you try to address all this info without sounding too technical. Okay? Write a short paragraph where you basically introduce your character. Okay, I think that's it for today. Thank you very much indeed. I hope to see you around, okay? Thanks a lot. Bye.